Lots of Cardinals news coming on Thursday, so let's dive right in. What's going on, everyone? Welcome into this edition of B-Schaeff Daily. Brenden Schaeffer with you. Apologize for missing Wednesday night's window to have an episode out for everybody for Thursday morning's listening pleasure, but it ended up working out really nicely because there's been a lot going on for the Cardinals on Thursday, and I want to take a quick moment to try and break down my thoughts on the latest pieces of information and news coming out about this club. Let's start with Phil Maton. He's the big news of the day in kind of section one because the Cardinals have finally made a free agent signing. It is right-handed pitcher, 31-year-old Phil Maton. Again, the first free agent signing for the Cardinals all offseason directly to the big league roster. Obviously, they did pick up Nick Anderson, but we'll see if he ends up making the team. Maybe the Phil Maton signing is a commentary on potentially how they're feeling about Nick Anderson, whether or not they'll end up pulling the trigger on giving him an opening day roster spot and a spot in that bullpen. But he's the big news of the day. Phil Maton signing with the Cardinals. Katie Wu reporting that the deal is 1 year for $2 million. We'll talk about the impact that has. I'll give you kind of a mock-up of what I think the bullpen's going to look like with some caveats that could potentially go one way or another depending on some decisions the Cardinals are going to make. And one of those decisions I think has already been made. In another piece of news today, Gordon Graceffo being optioned to AAA, so he's going to minor league camp now. Won't see him again in Grapefruit League. What does that mean? Why are the Cardinals doing that? And do I think it's a good move, bad move, or indifferent? I want to break down my thoughts on the why I think behind it and what it could mean. And should we be upset about it? Because, look, I know the Cardinals fans are asking, like, hey, you said there's going to be runway for young players. You said this was a transition year. How is it a transition year with Matz and Michaelis in the rotation and guys like Graceffo and maybe even Michael McGreevy? Like, we don't still know whether he'll get a rotation spot. You know, how can you claim both things at once and still be making the moves that you're making? Keeping Eric Fetty, you know, some people think the Cardinals should trade him. So those are topics that we're going to get into today. I think there's even been more than that, but that's the main squeeze that I'm going to try to knock out here. Let's shoot for 25 minutes or so, and we'll see if we end up going longer than that. I don't really have time to today, but we'll see. But I do, before I jump into the meat and potatoes of today's episode, I want to let you know about Kevin Foley with Universal Windows Direct. For over 20 years, Universal Windows Direct has been upgrading homes across St. Louis, but if you want the best in the business, you got to talk to Kevin. With expert advice, unbeatable deals, and a passion for perfect windows, Kevin, who is a big Cardinals fan, by the way, will help you find the perfect fit for your home. Right now, if you buy 2 windows, you'll get 2 free. Plus, ask about the special financing offers. Don't wait. Now's the time. Spring is here. Call or text 618-520-1234 today to schedule your free estimate, and you'll be saying, I love my windows. That's Kevin with Universal Windows Direct, and his information right there on the screen on YouTube. Make sure to give him a call or a text. Big Cardinals fan, can help you out with your home, get you some perfect windows, and for a good price. All right, let's go ahead and get into the first topic of the day. That's Phil Maton. This is a guy that was rumored to be going to the Cardinals last offseason. The Cardinals were interested in him. They talked with him. They weren't able to get a deal done. He goes to the Rays, ultimately was traded before the deadline to the Mets, and ended up pitching really well with New York down the stretch. In 28 2/3 innings, he had a 2.51 ERA over the last couple of months with New York. Didn't fare as well in the postseason with the Mets. I think he gave up like 3 or 4 home runs, gave up 6 earned runs in 6 2/3 postseason innings, but a 3.66 ERA overall in the season, and he pitched in 71 games last year, 64 innings. So availability, durability, he's going to kind of be the new Kittredge, potentially. And there are some concerns as to the fact that he hasn't pitched in spring training, hasn't faced live batters yet, kind of shades of Greg Holland. Do you have similar concerns? I actually don't. I don't think this is going to be a Greg Holland redux where the Cardinals signed him at the bitter end of spring training. He refused to, or maybe the Cardinals didn't ask him or demand him to go to the minors to ramp up, and he came right to St. Louis, and he stunk up the joint. $14 million crammed into a blender. It was one of the worst free agent signings of John Mozeliak's tenure. And you wonder, what's the last time a guy has been signed late in free agency and you're already into spring training and it's gone well? Right? You can think about another example that we know about locally where Jordan Montgomery, after the Cardinals traded him away at that deadline, the following year, I believe he was a Boras client at the time. We've talked about this on the B-Schaeff Daily channel. Ends up going way into the spring, and maybe even the season had started before somebody picked him up. And his contract with Arizona ended up being a brutal one, I think because it got off on the wrong foot, right? I don't think he's just a completely washed-up pitcher. We'll see this year if he ends up bouncing back. But that was just a situation where it clearly didn't serve him well to sign so late in the spring. But he's a starting pitcher Maton, a relief pitcher, and one aspect of Maton is he's not a big velo guy. Mozeliak talked this morning to reporters. They love the way this guy can spin it. He's got a really good curveball, breaking stuff, right? So the fact that he's maybe not fully ramped up, maybe not as big of a deal unless the curveball is suddenly flat on him. But he wasn't throwing 95 miles per hour anyway, and he's only a one-inning guy. So it's not like you have to ramp him up and say, well, you got to get him from being able to just start facing live hitters and then get him up to 4, 5, 6 inning stints. He's not a starter. So I think it's more doable. Yeah, you could say the Greg Holland thing was an example where it didn't work out. This is not a $14 million deal, though, either. It's a $2 million contract. The risk is basically zero for the Cardinals to do this. Why might they be doing this, though? Let's talk about maybe the motivation. One aspect, and I talked with Brooke Grimsley on Sports Hub STL's morning show about this earlier on Thursday, is that there's a recent article by Derek Gould out where within that article, it was discussed that Tony Clark says that, the players' union is kind of looking at teams, and the Cardinals are one of them, where historically they've spent more money and then they haven't done anything this offseason. Do you wonder if the Cardinals, kind of knowing that's sort of permeating out there in the air, say, we really should get something done, get a little bit of the heat off of us so we can at least say, hey, we signed a free agent. Like, that could be part of it. What else could be part of it? And I texted around to try and find out, and nobody really seems to know yet, but maybe later this afternoon after the Cardinals finish up their game, I think they're playing the Astros right now, saw there was a hit by Ivan Herrera that left fielder Jose Altuve, God bless his heart, was not able to get as he leaped there at the wall. I don't think he'll be taking away many homers as a left fielder, and it's fine I can say that because I'm also a short guy, so I know the plight. But anyway, maybe after the game, it'll be discussed. I asked one of the other reporters if they had heard anything. Nobody really has recently about Riley O'Brien, the fact that he hasn't really made an appearance in Grapefruit League lately, and it kind of reminds you of last spring when he was so sharp and he came into the season, struck out Ohtani on opening day, and then we never really heard from him again until very late in the season. Riley O'Brien was a guy that I thought seventh inning could kind of get into that mix of maybe a co-setup man with Orion Fernandez because the stuff is very, very good, but he's got to stay healthy. If they know Riley O'Brien's a little bit behind schedule, okay, that's another bullpen spot that maybe they had allocated mentally, but now they're thinking maybe they're not going to have him ready for the start of the season. Nick Anderson was a guy that they signed to a minor league deal with the ability to add him to the 40-man roster and have him make $1.1 million. But I don't know that he's a lock right now to be somebody they put on the 40-man roster for opening day. And if not, then he's probably out of the organization looking for another opportunity. He had a clause in his contract that allowed for that. So, there are some moving parts to the way that this could all break down. And the Graceffo aspect of this, with the Cardinals sending him to minors camp, as I mentioned earlier today, it comes after the Maton move. And I don't think that these moves are entirely unrelated, to be honest with you, because there was a track as spring was developing where Graceffo could have made the Major League bullpen out of camp. Obviously, they're pivoting to keeping him as part of that starting rotation depth conversation, and he's going to start the season in Memphis and continue to stretch out so that he's ready to go 5-6 innings and be in that role. Now, based on comments from this morning, and I think the way that it had been trending anyway, it seems like Matthew Liberatore is going to be in the bullpen. So as I'm making up this kind of mock bullpen for today's episode and trying to sort through some of what I think is happening or could happen, you can put Helsley, you can lock him in, you can lock in Jojo Romero. I think those are the only two guys who really don't have options, minor league options attached to them. I think you're going to see Matthew Liberatore for sure in the bullpen on opening day. If the longer he's with the team and not stretching to 4 or 5 innings at a time, the more likely it seems that he's going to be in a relief role where he's got maybe some dual purposes. He can give you multiple innings, or he could get you one tough lefty in the 7th. Like, I think that's going to be the way they use Liberatore. But Graceffo going down tells you he's out of the starting opening day bullpen conversation. But down the road, he can always dial back if they have a need in the bullpen and they feel good about their rotation depth at that point. Because right now, even though it feels like, oh my gosh, the Cardinals still have too many starters, you're not going to be able to fit McGreevy in the rotation. And so why in the heck would you need Graceffo for the rotation? Because you can't even fit the guys in there that are ready, like Michael McGreevy. We think Graceffo is big league ready potentially, maybe not as a starter, but he's close. McGreevy is certainly ready with the way that he's looked, right? And so that's sort of the sentiment that permeates around this team right now. But again, with 2 weeks to go from today, before opening day, if you ask me, Brenden, over under 0.5 injured starting pitchers from the Cardinals rotation between now and opening day, I'm taking the over. I'm still taking the over, even though we've got no reason to have signs for that. My only reasoning is it's always happened. Every single year somebody goes down, and there's still 2 weeks. There's time for that to happen. So when that happens, if I'm correct and it's the over, McGreevy is your fifth starter, and whichever guy is injured is on the 15-day IL, and you take it from there. But then if Liberatore is no longer part of that starter conversation because he's in the big league bullpen, Graceffo slides up a spot. That when you might need somebody, it could be him. Graceffo is on the 40-man roster. Somebody who's not on the 40-man roster like Quinn Matthews, again, higher burden of proof. There's a higher standard that he will have to meet for the Cardinals to make that decision to put him on the big league rotation and get him in there because he's not currently on the 40-man roster. And again, those roster spots, as much as we say, like, you could always drop somebody, they are valuable to an extent, and you don't want to just flippantly be making decisions. There's an order of operations. Even for a team in a retool, even for a team in transition year, the order of operations is going to involve Graceffo, I think, getting a look before Quinn, unless Quinn is lighting it up, which could very well happen in April, May. And then the order of operations could change a little bit. And let's say Quinn does light it up in April, May down in AAA. Well, now the Cardinals are even more comfortable saying, hey, if we need a legit arm for the bullpen, maybe Graceffo is the call, and at some point in the summer, he shifts from, he's a starter, to, no, he's a reliever, because you look down the line and you have more confidence in the guys that could be filling in to backfill for that rotation. But I think right now, you're not in a spot where day one, you're predicting Quinn Matthews to be ready. If he shows he is over the next 6 weeks, great. The Cardinals would love that. And ultimately, I think they're going to be more willing in a year like this to let him jump the line than they would have been in other seasons where they're going to adhere more strictly to that order of operations. You talk about guys like, and look, this is the sentiment that permeates Twitter. And again, I think it's a lost mindset because it's under the guise that the Cardinals only care about the young guys, which they do care about it in certain spots, and they want to bring it along in the right timeline. But they're not going to cut a well-performing Steven Matz or cut a well-performing Miles Mikolas, pay him the money to go away just because, social media people want the pitching prospect to get the job instead. That's not going to happen, and I actually happen to agree with the Cardinals on that for now. If mid-May gets here and you don't have a well-performing Mikolas or Matz, by all means, and there's somebody in AAA, whether it's Graceffo or Quinn Matthews or anybody else, really. Tekoa Roby, I think, is starting at Springfield, but if he performs well, I'm going to be aggressive in the way that I cover this and say, look, if Mikolas is struggling and Matz is struggling and you've seen a handful of starts from them and it's kind of more of what we got from him last year, don't be afraid to set him free. Don't be afraid to cut him loose. However, Mikolas had a 5 innings, 1 run allowed start in spring yesterday, and as I'm recording this podcast, the Cardinals are playing, and Steven Matz has gotten the Cardinals today through checking this live, 4 2/3 innings of 1-run ball before Ludus came in. So, if Matz is performing, why would you just voluntarily say, no, my agenda is that the kids need to play, and so I have to have them there on April 1st. Otherwise, the Cardinals are, they're lying about getting the young guys opportunity. No, it doesn't. Two things can happen at once. And I think you're going to see all of this play out. I think you're going to see a little more feet to the fire when it comes to Mikolas and Matz for the first 6 weeks. If they're pitching well, guess what? They're going to stay in the rotation. If they're pitching well 6 weeks later, guess what? We're getting closer to the trade deadline at that point. And if the Cardinals aren't a contending team, Mikolas and Matz will definitely be discussed when it comes to trades. Eric Fetty will definitely be discussed when it comes to trades. Ryan Helsley will definitely be discussed when it comes to trades. If this Cardinals team gets to July and they're 7 games under 500, they're going to sell off at the deadline. Absolutely, they will. And if they don't, I'll criticize them for it. If they're contending, different story. They'll have to say, well, how likely is it that we get a wild card? How likely is it that we're contending in the Central? And make their decisions based on that. But I guess my stump speech, and it's going to sound like I'm stumping for the Cardinals because there's a lot of people who disagree with what they're doing. And I'm not doing this and people can say I'm lying and I'm carrying water. We joked about it on the morning show on Sports Hub STL that I'm just carrying the water of the Cardinals when I say this. But I think a lot of things can be true at the same time, that there's variance to what this Cardinals season could bring. And if it brings the bad side of that variance, you're going to see trades. And then by midseason, it is a lot of the guys that everybody wants to see. Graceffo is going to sink or swim in a rotation spot by late July. Maybe even Liberatore gets stretched back out and is in one of those spots. McGreevy's going to be in there, right? Fetty, Mikolas, Matz won't be on the team August 1st if the Cardinals aren't in contention. I just don't see any reason that they would be. And if that's the case on August 1st and I was wrong, I'm going to do the awkward thing and be like, hey, Michaelis has a 5.3 ERA. He doesn't need to be in a rotation for a team that's going nowhere fast in 2025. But there's variants where the Cardinals could be going somewhere in 2025. You may not believe it out there in Cardinals land, but I think it does exist that this team could put it together. We went through the morning show, and I asked Brooke Grimsley, every single OPS from last year, Cardinals players, higher or lower, what do you think the guy will do this year relative to what he did last year? And almost invariably with every player, she said, I think he could actually go higher. And I don't think it's actually crazy to say that. Granted, am I predicting that every player will go higher? Absolutely not. Every player won't end up going higher. But if I'm looking at each player individually, I could certainly see where there's room to improve for almost everybody, except for Contreras. I think he'll be lower, but if he's lower by 10 points in OPS, but doing it in 50 extra games, the Cardinals got way better offensively because he was their best hitter last year, and the reason he didn't play as much is because he broke his arm like twice, right? So he's playing first base now. Hopefully that mitigates some of the risk of his injury potential, and even if he doesn't have quite a career year like he basically was on track to have last year, I think you get more production from him. The team wins more games. The team is better for it. There's room for that with a lot of these guys. So I'm not going to blame the Cardinals for kind of taking a conservative approach early when it comes to the rotation instead of like money that they're already spending, right? We know this is the way they operate. Do I think there needs to be a change in the aggressiveness to showcase younger guys as it goes along in 2025? Absolutely. Otherwise, you're claiming that this is a transition year, but you're transitioning to just more of the same. It would just be BS bluster at that point. But I'm going to take the Cardinals at their word on they're transitioning whether Mozeliak wants to or not. It's not his job next year. So as the season goes along, I think this has to gear more toward a Chaim Bloom world unless the Cardinals are legitimately in the thick of contention. And then you have to talk about, do you add a bullpen piece or a bat at the deadline to try to contend? What's the onus on the Cardinals to do that and keep the fan interest if it's there? But if they stink, guys, they're not. It's not like just because Michaelis and Matz are in the rotation on March 27th means they're going to be there on August 7th. It absolutely is not going to be that way. So you get through April, right? First, you got to get through March. And I said I'd still take the over on having a pitching injury to the rotation between now and the 27th. I'd take the over. So with that in mind, no, you're not going to tell a Matz that's performing well in spring or a Michaelis that's performing well in spring, hit the road, Jack. We're going to pay you to go away. That's ludicrous. People, I think, get in their bubble of, I want the young guys, and they don't even watch the games for what's happening in spring. Now, the other side of that is don't get too caught up in what's happening in spring. It's got to happen in the real season, too, and I'm going to judge that in the month of April. Is Michaelis pitching well? Is Matz pitching well? If not, guess what? There's nothing tying them to the team beyond this year, and if the Cardinals are kind of floundering, even more reason to kind of say, all right, we left the window open. The lane of opportunity to have this be a good club was open, but you know what? Our pitching just ain't going to get us there. So let's give some young pitchers that opportunity, and maybe they'll surprise us and be more ready than we thought they were. And next thing you know, the 2026 rotation looks a lot different because Graceffo is actually a dog. Like, he's able to do it. McGreevy is a dog. He's able to do it. And suddenly the rebuild, the rebrand happens a lot more quickly, and you're suddenly finding yourself flush with those rotation options that you've been starving for, which is why you went out and signed 3 free agent starters last offseason. So there's room to pivot. I don't think that adding a Phil Maton today means the Cardinals can't do it when it comes to giving opportunities to younger guys in their bullpen. Guess what? Outside of Helsley, JoJo, and I assume Maton, everybody else is optionable. Everybody else can be sent to AAA at a various point in the season. Not saying they'll do it, but they might. Ryan Fernandez, they would have done it last year. Mozeliak has basically said as much. There was a part in the season where he wore down for a stretch, even though he was so good, but he was a Rule 5 pick, so they couldn't. They had to keep him on the roster. Now they don't. John King, they still don't. He's in arbitration. Doesn't matter. He's still got an option. Fernandez has an option. Ryan Ludus, Chris Roycroft, Kyle Leahy, Riley O'Brien, Matt Swanson could be somebody. He's on the 40-man, so he's going to be part of that churn. All of those guys will pitch in the big leagues this year. I guarantee it, unless they get hurt in the next couple of weeks. They're all going to pitch in the big leagues. Every name I just said. They're going to churn through the last couple of spots of that bullpen, though. Even Liberatore technically has an option. They're only going to use the option on Libby, in my opinion, if they're stretching him out to be a starter, because they lose some depth, and there you go. Hey, we got to pivot back. We started you as a reliever, but we need to give you time to ramp up. Rather than doing it on the fly at the big league level, we're gonna let you use that option and go take a couple starts at Memphis, and then we'll see you in a couple of weeks when we have a need for the rotation, which is invariably going to happen. So when I look at the spots, Helsley, JoJo, Maton, locked in. I do not think Nick Anderson is a lock for this bullpen. He just hasn't looked good. So part of the reason that you sign Maton could be because you're not actually going to exercise the Anderson option. Or you recognize there's 2 weeks for relievers to get hurt too, and maybe you're not over the moon about Anderson, but you might have him in there at the beginning, see how it looks, because some of the guys that you wanted for that spot are actually hurt. Riley O'Brien, maybe he's injured. We're going to find out soon. I'm asking reporters down there to please ask this question so that we can get the answer of why we haven't seen him lately in a spring game. Maybe we'll see him today, and that'll be the answer. But it's just the situation that it is where these are still going to be spots that are locked up, and then there's going to be some spots that are certainly in flux. Because Helsley, JoJo, Maton is 3. I'll count Libby as 4. Libby and JoJo give you at least 2 lefties at all times, so King could be optioned, Fernandez could be optioned, and you have all these other pieces that I think are malleable. Right now, Graceffo is still sticking in the starter conversation. I bet he makes a relief appearance in St. Louis this year. The roster on March the 28th, this year more than any other, is not going to be the roster on August 28th or when you get to the end of the season. And I understand why Cardinals fans would be a little bit impatient because they want it to change now because they're tired of the way that it has looked. And so the fact that it doesn't look very different right now is annoying. Definitely entitled to feel that way. I feel like I'm going to let the first few weeks play out because Steven Matz, we've seen signs of him actually being really good at times throughout this contract. His issue has been can't stay healthy. And at times he gets that one blow-up game that then he goes on the injured list, and you look at the end-of-season results, and you're like, well, he had a 5 ERA last year. Yeah, he probably had one game where he was actually hurt, tried to pitch through it, and he stunk. And so that, ends up changing the numbers pretty significantly when you end up not pitching a bunch throughout the season because of the injuries. So I think if Steven Matz is sharp, by all means, you put him in. He's got a 2.63 ERA this spring. Why are we talking about Steven Matz and getting him out of the rotation when I talk with people on Twitter? It's silly. It's silly. Just let it play out. I understand the frustration. I'm not saying you're not entitled to it. I think it's a little bit silly to just play this game of MLB The Show on paper and go, well, Gordon Graceffo is a young player, so we should slot him into the rotation and simulate the season and see what it looks like. It's a real baseball. These are real people that it's happening to. So you're going to let Matz play out in the month of April and probably to mid-May. You're going to let the same thing happen with Miles Mikolas. If it's not going well for either of those guys, believe me, I will be at the top of the step going, hey, it's unfortunate, but the Cardinals, from a front office perspective, should probably treat this differently than just keeping these guys all year long. I don't want to have to do that because I hate it. I hate when you're calling for people's jobs because that is not a comfortable feeling. People could call for my job and they'd probably be right. I'm no good at this, right? I'm just a dude. But it's one of those things where because of the nature of this game and this business and where the Cardinals are at, it would not be unreasonable to start saying, should Mikolas be on this team if his ERA is 6 on May 15th? Should Matz be on this team if his ERA is 5.5 on May 15th? Probably not, especially if no other injuries do happen. Knock on wood. Hopefully they don't. They probably will. But if no other injuries happen and Graceffo is pitching well at AAA and Quinn Matthews is making the jump at AAA, it's going to be very much noticeable every fifth day that one of those guys at the major league level pitches, doesn't have a contract, you're supposedly in a transition year, and they're struggling while somebody who could take their spot tomorrow is pitching really well. That's going to happen this summer if those guys struggle. I don't think it has to happen before March 27th because I think what you would be doing is you're tempting fate at that point. To say, oh, no, yeah, we don't need Graceffo. Like, this is a transition year. Let's put him in there. We got to find out what this kid can do. McGreevy is in. Mikolas, cut. Matz, cut. Open day rotation, which is what everybody on Twitter would say they want. It's going to be Sonny Gray. It's going to be, hell, they want Fetty traded because they think there's all these prospects that are ready. There's a great quote from Ollie Marmol this morning. I don't have time to get the audio into this clip, but we played it this morning on Sports Hub STL. Go back to the morning show and watch that show with myself and Brooke Grimsley and Matt Rocchio, where Ollie said, like, this Phil Maton thing is going to help because, yes, we're going to play these young players. Guys are going to get their chances throughout the year, but we also want to make sure they're ready when they get that opportunity. We don't want to just go, okay, you trade Fetty to the Yankees because they need somebody. The Yankees don't want to give you a big prospect, but you really want to clear a spot for McGreevy, so you do. And then you dump Steven Matz, even though he's pitching well in spring, 2.6 ERA, and you dump him because you want to get Graceffo in the rotation. And you know what? Libby wants to start too, so we're going to put him in the rotation, and Mikolas is going to get cut because even though he's pitching okay so far this spring, he's on a one-year deal, and you have to, day one, make sure you've got all of this runway set. It's got to be set on the 27th of March. If that's it, your rotation is what? Sonny, Palante, McGreevy, Graceffo, Libby. Is that what everybody wants? That might be your rotation August 1st. It's not going to be your rotation today. Maybe it's Quinn Matthews instead of one of those guys by August 1st. But it's not going to be your rotation today, and I think that's actually okay. Does it mean that I am saying the Cardinals are just nailing it at every turn? No. They made some mistakes to get to this point. Michaelis shouldn't have been extended, right? Steven Matz shouldn't have been extended. Or you could make the case that, they offered him that contract when they did. That was like right before the lockout. They wanted to lock him in, and they got him. It's not like an overly crazy contract, but it's been multiple years where it hasn't really panned out, and you're toward the tail end of it. So you might as well throw him out there at the beginning of the year, see what you get. Throw Michaelis out there, see what you get. Because what happens if those guys are performing well, but the Cardinals aren't, and they're 5 games under July 1st, you can probably trade Matz for something at that point. You certainly can trade Fetty for something at that point if he's performing, rather than just force feed the trade now just because you see an opening in New York's rotation. Yeah, do them a favor. Save Bill DeWitt some money. Why? To get the prospects in, they're going to pitch. The prospects are going to get their chance to pitch, and it's going to come on their timeline of when they're ready. You can make a case, yes, McGreevy should be in the rotation day one. It would be nice if they could do it that way. And if they hadn't extended Michaelis, it would be pretty simple. Like that would be the spot, and he'd be in there. Okay, we'll just cut Michaelis. Nah, you don't have to though. Why go out of your way to tempt fate? What happens if you cut Michaelis and you trade Fetty so that you can give a spot to Graceffo and McGreevy, and Graceffo or McGreevy or Sonny or Palante or Matz, one of those guys gets hurt, which is Matz does plenty of times. Okay, bring up Quinn. What if he's legit not quite ready yet? Let's see him look great in Memphis because he's not done that yet. He had a 6 ERA when he was there the last month of the season. Let's have him have a good month in Memphis, and then I'm on board, guys. I'm going to be searching for roster spots with the rest of you to bump somebody from the 40-man to get him in here. But until that happens, let's chill, because you could have it go the other way, get rid of 2 guys because you thought you had this abundance of starting pitching depth, and then suddenly you don't, and 2 of those guys get hurt, and then you're going, crap, why is Roddery Munoz starting games? He looked bad in the spring. He's not ready. There's no reason for the Cardinals to put themselves in this position, transition year or not. So I think they're not going to. They're going to keep Michaelis and Matz on the team for now because they should. They're probably going to keep Eric Fetty because I don't think now is the right time to get the most for him. That could blow up in their faces, for sure. I don't happen to know what's being offered to the Cardinals for Eric Fetty, if anything. We can play the game on Twitter and say, they should get together. We'll be matchmaker and get them together because they have a need, the Cardinals have extra. Maybe. Looks like Lance Lynch maybe signing with the Cubs. That's weird. All these things are in flux. All these things are happening. I just don't necessarily look at it and say, well, the Cardinals are bungling this because they're letting the guys that they're already paying start the season with them. Let's have the conversation May 1st, May 15th, June 1st. And we'll have it every 5 days. It's going to be a little bit awkward, like I said, because every bad start from Matz and Michaelis, we're also going to be scanning the box scores from Memphis. Hopefully we get another Down on the Farm sponsor. By the way, if you're out there, want to sponsor Down on the Farm, we'll do it. We'll bring it back this year. But it's like one of those deals where until all of that plays out, I'm not going to freak out about these veterans being on the team to begin the year, because whether you think the Cardinals have a chance to be good or not, there is a variance and a world in which they can contend this year. Again, if every OPS, not all of them are going to, but if all of them are about what they were last year or a little bit better, you don't lose anything offensively. Goldschmidt had a 716 OPS. He wasn't good. What you will lose is his defense, and Wilson will do his best, but he won't be Goldie, and everybody's going to have to get used to that. You might, in trying to fit more bats in the lineup at the same time, if everybody stays healthy, lose on defense in center field, because I don't think Newt is going to be as good as Ciani or Victor Scott. And if Victor Scott's not ready, that battle would be a Newt versus Ciani daily conversation. If Victor Scott's ready, I think you'll see a lot of Victor Scott in center to start the season. But will they go more heavy with Herrera at catcher? They probably have to, because they need the offensive thump that he can bring. But Pages is going to catch 50, 60 games, I think. So all of those things, I think, are in play, in flux. But it's the reason that I don't think the Cardinals are nearly as aggressive with saying, let's get rid of these veterans and let the kids play on March 27th. If they're doing it the same, Cardinal fans, and it's later in the year and the team's not contending, I will be talking almost daily about, like, why are they doing it this way? But for now, I'm okay with letting it play out. You can feel however you want to feel about it, but that's my take. When it comes to Phil Maton, the impact of Graceffo, again, Graceffo is going to jump the line a little bit. He's closer to the rotation in MLB than you think, because Libby's not going to be in that conversation. And look, if he is, I'm going to say, man, the Cardinals are trying to play. They're playing too much. If they're going to start Libby in the bullpen, but then Sonny goes down, so they plop Libby into the rotation and do what they did with him last year. You don't need to do that this time. You've got to ready McGreevy. You've got to ready Graceffo. Whether Graceffo is a good MLB starter someday or not, I don't know, but he's as ready as he's going to be. I agree with that. But for the time being, I think it's okay to let 6 weeks play out, 4 to 6 weeks even. So we'll see. Let me know what you guys think. I'll be talking way more Cardinals today than I ever needed to, but you'll hear me on Cards Up 365 on the Sports Hub STL channel. We'll be talking Cardinals on the Big Show on KTGR later today, and B-Schaeff Daily will continue to roll on as it always does. But make sure with Universal Windows Direct, you check out my guy Kevin. His information is on the screen there. That, though, will do it for this edition of B-Schaeff Daily. Appreciate you guys as always. Get those comments in, like the video before you go, and we'll talk to you next time on B-Schaeff Daily. Peace.